The year's winding down, and that means I have one last chance to look back at the titles I never found the time for before they stop being SEO relevant and are banished to the Shadow Realm forever. Welcome to the Year in Review. I'm Alex, this is First 5, and I'm checking out some of the hottest games of 2022. They're short, they're sweet, and they're already peer-reviewed and probably topping somebody's Game of the Year list somewhere. This time we're looking at Vampire Survivors, a game that's incredibly easy to describe, you walk around and stuff explodes, and yet difficult to succinctly capture the spirit of. This one cemented itself as the first real indie darling of 2022 way back in January, and in the time between then and its 1.0 launch a month back, a great deal of digital ink has been spilled trying to capture the magic of what feels like a seemingly singular game. For the terminally online video game crowd, meaning me and almost everybody I know, Vampire Survivors wasn't so much a game as a seemingly spontaneous months-long phenomenon. But if you haven't heard of Vampire Survivors, it's a horde mode game where you start with a few simple whips and crosses, then slowly escalate more and more over the course of 30 minutes until you become an untouchable god, scything your way through thousands of enemies a second. The whole twist, however, is that all the weapons you pick up are automated. You can walk around to avoid enemies and pick up power-ups, but all the crazy fireworks are going off all on their own. It is, in a sense, a DPS race between yourself and the ever-growing hordes of undead, where as things escalate over time, you have to keep upgrading your weapons to bigger and crazier versions of themselves like a DBZ movie speedrunning through 2 decades of Super Saiyan tears. And that's pretty much the moment-to-moment gameplay. There's some extremely light and strict character building and a little bit of randomness to spice things up, and there's some interesting interplay between the different weapons you can acquire and how they all have obvious flaws that are shored up by combining with other weapons. But yeah, that's the game. It's pretty cool.
Like and subscribe and go check out my Patreon. Like and subscribe and go check out my Patreon.
Okay, look, if you've just been casually hearing about Vampire Survivors through word of mouth, that's probably where you think the game starts and ends. But you're selling the game short if that's all you imagine when you think about Vampire Survivors. To be perfectly clear, all of this is extremely shiny and watching the big number go up is genuinely appealing, but other games are already doing it better. I covered 20 minutes till dawn what feels like a century ago, but it has a lot more depth to its character building, with more interesting items to try and combine together to create unique builds, some really inspired character archetypes, and a less structured system of upgrades that offers additional flexibility in where you want to take a build. Vampire Survivors is a perfectly good game, but its moment-to-moment gameplay is already being iterated upon by an influx of sudden contenders vying for its throne. And that's before you even consider the fact that other long-running genres like tower defense games have already been mastering this kind of gameplay loop for decades. But thankfully, becoming an immortal god is just the beginning, because Vampire Survivors' real magic is in the metagame. Every time you start to think Vampire Survivors is just this simple little game, you peel back another layer and find something completely new to pursue. You can't walk 5 feet without tripping over some new secret facet of gameplay. And I'm not just talking about unlocking a few new characters. It apparates entirely new menu buttons into existence and introduces entirely new mechanics to take yourself to ever-increasingly busted heights. It keeps getting bigger and weirder, and every time you think you've hit the ceiling, you're proven wrong. And then you combine that with the shoestring budget vibes, low poly pixel art, and so many Castlevania references you can't believe it's not triggering lawsuits, and yeah, it feels like you stumbled on an ancient piece of lost media, something that feels like it shouldn't exist. Vampire Survivors feels like a game that somehow got buried in the woods 30 years ago, only to get exhumed by some random guy and thrown onto the modern internet. And every random little secret carefully laid in your path feels like discovering the cursed side of that game that was never meant to see the light of day. It's the exact same trick Inscription pulled, but played entirely straight, and it works. Like, really works. I'm being purposely vague here, but obviously the more I explain this, the less it's probably going to wow you if you go and experience it yourself. So if you want to go in blind, skip to this timestamp for the conclusion. The rest is all spoilers from here. If I haven't already made it clear, the thing that really makes Vampire Survivors tick is its sense of exploration and discovery. It's in the moments where you unlock a new item that suddenly gives you a map and you realize you're not just roaming a repetitive wasteland. There's actually stuff out there you can find and use. It's when you see the question mark on your newfound map and go to see what that's all about and there's just coffins lying around, and opening them up gives you new bonus characters. And what the heck? They start with completely new abilities you've never even seen before. It's when the game is seemingly presenting you with a hard boundary in the form of a Grim Reaper that spawns and instantly murders you at the 30-minute mark, but then presents you with the mechanics to make you realize, wait a second, this guy ain't shit, I can totally kill him. A big part of why this works is just the sheer momentum of it all. At the pace I was going, I was unlocking entirely new mechanics almost every time I completed a run, and every time I did unlock something new, I suddenly had a dozen new runs to plan next. You bust open something like the Randomazo, and suddenly you have dozens of new unlocks to pursue. But the real trick of it all is how Vampire Survivors only ever offers small glimpses of what might lie ahead. The game never explicitly tells you that you can kill a Grim Reaper, but it sure will let you know you're doing damage to it. It'll never even hint at the fact that the Randomazo, this entirely new mechanical layer, exists, but it will tell you there's a relic you haven't found yet that might do something kinda neat. Exploring new content will almost inevitably cause you to discover or unlock something even further beyond that, be it a new item, a one-time special event, or so on. I've heard longtime players gush about how often the game gets updated, with something new for them to do anytime they decide to pop in, but in waiting until the game left early access, I got to experience that entire process over the span of half a week, essentially the video game equivalent of Netflix binging a season of TV. And just like a binge session, Vampire Survivors feels phenomenally compelling while you're on this little railroad track of discovery and exploration that feels like it might actually never end. This game keeps its cards so close to its chest while throwing enough constant curveballs at you that suddenly any set boundary becomes suspect and any potential idea could be hiding the next mechanical wrinkle. It's the same idea as only giving small glimpses of a horror movie monster. Anything could be lurking in that negative space. The game could go anywhere. And that's not an easy feeling to inspire in a player, especially one like me that's already played hundreds of games. Vampire Survivors is also operating on a similar level as something like, say, Warframe, Destiny, or almost any gacha game ever created, where in having to perpetually update themselves with new content to give their player base something to keep chewing through, these lifestyle games all have to keep introducing entirely new mechanical ways to elevate your gear. Just some rapid-fire examples to explain what I'm talking about. Think about how Genshin Impact released the city reputation system, offerings, and more after launch, or how Warframe introduced new tiers of equipment through the Orokin Void and Derelicts. It's not enough to simply add more levels to the Battle Pass ladder. These games keep the grind interesting over the course of months and years by coming up with novel ways to repackage what you were already doing with new collectibles and an extra mechanical layer to now consider on top of everything else. But instead of introducing some super Orokin Cell evolution for you to go spend 4 weeks farming for all of your Warframe guns, Vampire Survivors gives you the Randomazo to go spend a week unlocking a bunch of tarot cards that'll buff different builds. And if that sort of thing tickles your brain, as it does mine, you're going to have an absolute blast with this game, because it takes that power grind and compresses both sides of the equation. You only ever have to wait a month or two before you get a new tier of content to crack open, and the process of actually doing that won't require you to grind nonstop for months on end. It's all the exact same endorphins of a lifestyle game in a much more sustainable and healthy package that still leaves room to enjoy other video games or hobbies. And if a game can accomplish that, it is automatically my jam. But with that resounding endorsement, let's ask the big question. What do you get out of 5 hours with Vampire Survivors? Your mileage may vary depending on how long you live and how quickly you start unlocking things, but right around the 2-hour mark, I started cracking Vampire Survivors in a very real way. After working my way through a few introductory maps and discovering a few weapon upgrades, this was where I started peeling back the first layers of the game and discovering what felt like quote-unquote secrets. And everything since has just been a race through an ever-expanding fever dream of unlockable characters, secret dungeons, and entirely new mechanics. 5 hours won't get you to the end of that breadcrumb trail, but it will get you well on your way. I've been enjoying it enough that I've been playing ahead a little bit while writing the review, and I feel like around the 15-ish hour mark, you've seen most of what the game has in store, and it's just a matter of mopping up the last few secrets for the completionists. The game also came out with a DLC this week. It's not a particular revelation compared to what's come before, but it is more of the same if you're hungry for it, and it does have a much more involved map than anything I've seen in the base game. Overall, it's a worthy addition. Vampire Survivors is a spectacle, a game that pushes well beyond its simple on-screen gameplay with a perfect confluence of personality and ever-expanding momentum that I don't think you can really replicate. The game absolutely deserves its phenomenon status, and if, like me, you've been waiting to get around to this one for whatever reason, you absolutely owe it to yourself to finally take the plunge. So that's Vampire Survivors in a nutshell. I think you should give it a look. And if you've got some spare cash after that and like this video, consider hitting up my Patreon, because I too need to eat and would very much appreciate the tip. But I hope you enjoyed this review of Vampire Survivors, and I'll see you all next time.